It is indeed a privilege to sit on the same dais with Flemming Rose, who is, although he would deny it, I think you'll know in an hour why I regard him as a genuine hero, a remarkable man who has written a remarkable book. It's really an extraordinary read. I can't recommend this book strongly enough because it's not only, it's got very good theory on the importance of free speech and on what's going on in Europe, but it's also a person's journey of discovery, finding out in a very immediate way why these things matter, going to the core of some very dark truths in Europe and also in America. Most of you probably know something about what happened in 2005, but I thought we'd just begin there with at least a brief recap. As Flemming's book does, this begins with self-censorship that predates the Mohammed cartoons, right? It involves a children's book.
Yes, in the middle of September 2005, a very famous Danish children's writer, his name is Kåre Bluitgen, he went public to the Danish news service saying that I'm writing a children's book about the life of the Prophet Muhammad, and in children's book you do need illustrations of the main character, but I have problems finding an illustrator for this book. And according to Mr. Bluitgen, 3 illustrators turned down his offer, as far as I remember, and the one who finally said yes insisted on anonymity, which is a form of self-censorship. Out of fear, you do not want to appear under your own name when you do something. He was specifically referring to the fate of Salman Rushdie, who received a fatwa from Ayatollah Khomeini in 1989 because of a few pages in the satanic verses. But he was also referring to the fate of Theo van Gogh, a Dutch filmmaker who was killed in Amsterdam almost exactly 10 years ago because he had made a movie that a young Muslim, a young Dutch Muslim, found had offended his God. But we had only Kåre Bluitgen's word in the beginning. He was the only source to this story. So, and it was a front-page story in Denmark, and then we had a following-up discussion at the paper, how can we follow up on this story? And then this idea came up, why don't we invite illustrators or cartoonists to draw the Prophet Muhammad as they see him, so we can see if there is censorship and there is this fundamental journalistic principle, don't tell it.
One of the factors you mentioned that's particularly interesting, you're not politically naive, but you refer to the tyranny of silence. This is one of a lot of very good quotations about it, as a society in which grievance fundamentalism is consistently practiced, where nothing meaningful can be uttered since any speech of any sort may potentially be characterized as offensive to some person or group. What is grievance fundamentalism, and to what extent is it driving this phenomenon?
I think it's a consequence of the erosion of the very important distinction between speech and action, between words and deeds. An increasing number of people believe that words can be as criminal as deeds. And I think the irony is that this is, in fact, the way the Christian Church thought about these issues before the Enlightenment. That when you criticized the Church or doctrine, verbally it was being perceived as a physical attack on the Church, and therefore you could be condemned to death. But I think the issue is, you know, it's also because people want harmony. They don't want conflict. They believe that if we are quiet, if we don't talk about things that bother us, then we will keep the peace. But I don't believe so. And I think basically, you know, there are 2 ways to go. You can say, if you respect my taboo, I respect yours. If you do not criticize what is sensitive to me, I will not criticize what is sensitive to you. If Holocaust denial is a criminal offense, as it is in many European countries, publication of cartoons like these should also be a criminal offense. And if that's the case, then you would also need not to publish cartoons of other religions, making fun of other religions and prophets. And if you do that with religion, you would also have to do the same with non-believers. A lot of people like Karl Marx or Milton Friedman or Adam Smith, so then we're not allowed to make fun of them as well. And I basically believe, you know, this is the road to the title of my book, A Tyranny of Silence, where you are not able to say anything that not will be offensive to somebody. And I make the point that, you know, in a democracy, you have many rights. The right to free speech, to freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, you have a right to vote, freedom of movement. But I think the only right you should not have in a democracy is a right not to be offended. That we have to pay, you know, the price we have to pay for living in this nice, free, open societies is that there are people who from time to time will say something we find offensive, and that is growing. That risk is growing with diversity.